Welcome, bourbon lovers, to the very first episode of our pre-launch series, Chasing the Unicorn, your quest for the perfect pour. I'm your host, John Schuster, and this is Prologue, Episode 1, The Chase Begins, airing on November 20th, 2024. So whether you're a seasoned connoisseur or just starting your bourbon journey, this Prologue series is here to give you a taste of what's to come when we officially launch in January 2025. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the sheer variety of bourbons out there, or if you're curious about the stories behind your favorite bottles, you're in the right place. Each week, we'll explore a different facet of the bourbon world, uncover the latest news and events in our Bourbon Buzz segment, connect with fellow enthusiasts in Around the Barrel, and take a deep dive into fascinating topics like mash bill, distilling techniques, in our Drunken Unicorn Uncorked. I'll also share tasting experiences in the perfect pour. And of course, we'll wrap things up with Last Call, where we'll distill the essence of each episode into a memorable takeaway. This week, we're kicking things off with a trip to Widow Jane Distillery in Brooklyn, where we'll uncover the secrets behind their unique small batch bourbon. We'll also discuss some timely news from the bourbon world, including an interesting future of the bourbon market. So grab your favorite glass, settle in, get ready for a bourbon experience. Our chase begins now. All right, bourbon fans, it is time for Bourbon Buzz. Got a jam-packed episode with everything from new releases and cool events to the potential crisis brewing in the bourbon world. First up, some exciting news from Craft Bourbon World. The San Francisco World Spirits Competition just announced its winners, and Augusta Distillery's Buckner's 15-year single-barrel bourbon took home the gold. The best craft bourbon. This Kentucky distillery, founded in 2018, is making some pretty good waves. It's a small batch, single-barrel bourbon made with a high rye mash bill. And if you're looking to try something new, this award-winning bourbon might just be where you want to start. And for this week's Whiskey Whatnot, we're looking at a Rabbit Hole Distillery's new Boxer Grail Rye Whiskey. Now, they've been making their Boxer Grail for quite a while, but this is a limited edition rye finished in a sherry cask and gives it a unique flavor. They say it has notes of blackberry, dark chocolate, fig, golden raisins, with hints of brown sugar and spice. It's bottled at 105 proof and available, of course, at select retailers and online. But this is definitely a different twist on a rye. Now let's talk events. For those who enjoy the finer things in life, the Ritz-Carlton in Cleveland, Ohio, is hosting a rare bourbon tasting event on November 23rd. It's a 5-course tasting menu, with each course paired with a rare or vintage bourbon. They'll even have a Pappy Van Winkle 23 and a George T. Stagg. Tickets are $225 per person, and you do need a reservation. Now, moving on. Down in Dallas, Bottle Raiders just wrapped up their whiskey washback event. They had Texas-style barbecue, Gulf Coast seafood, and whiskey-infused cakes. And, of course, that was all done while they were enjoying some cigars and some live music. They also showed off their new app that helps you find the best whiskey based on reviews. Something to look forward to next year. If you didn't make it this year, would be my guess. Now, speaking of events, the Austin Food and Wine Festival just finished its 13th year with a big focus on bourbon and cocktails. They had everything from classic Texas barbecue to fusion dishes. Plus, of course, tons of bourbon cocktails. Now, for some news that's a bit more serious, there's talk of potential bourbon crisis. Apparently, the bourbon industry uses a lot of white oak barrels. Who knew, right? And with bourbon becoming more and more popular, there are some worries about running out of this particular wood. Now, this conversation comes up every now and then. But companies like Independent Stave Company, who make a lot of those barrels, aren't too worried. That doesn't mean that they're not working hard to be sustainable. But it's important to remember that bourbon usually only uses a very small portion of this wood. But if you are worried, the industry does plant about 2 trees for every one that they bring down. And when they harvest it, you plant a new one. But I will say it takes about 80 years before that tree to grow up and be harvested again. So we'll have to figure that one out maybe in our next generation. Now, they say they need to focus on that sustainable forestry practice and keep making bourbon. So what do you guys think? Let me know on social media. Speaking of sustainability, a recent study suggests that bourbon distilleries could be a new source of renewable energy. And we're not talking about drinking the bourbon or making the bourbon the fuel. What we're really talking about is they're talking the leftover stillage from making bourbon could be used to create methane. Now, if you're not familiar with stillage, it's the grainy product left over from the distillation process. It's traditionally been used for things like animal feed or fertilizer, but this new study shows it could be used to create a cleaner fuel source. How it works is anaerobic bacteria feed on the stillage and produce methane as a byproduct. This methane can be used to power distillery plants, fuel trucks, heat homes, or possibly generate electricity. This has a significant impact, not just on the bourbon industry, but for the environment as a whole. Distilleries could potentially create a circular system where waste is turned into fuel, reducing the reliance on fossil fuels and contributing to a more sustainable future. Now, I got to say, there's nothing like saying your distillery is grain to glass, and it's green all in the same breath. I don't know how you say that yet, but I'll figure that one out later. Of course, we're going to have to watch this one and see where it goes. And speaking of some good things happening in the bourbon world, it looks like Kentucky bourbon tourism is booming. Go figure. According to the Kentucky Distiller Association, over 2.5 million visitors toured distilleries across the state in 2023. That's a significant increase from 2022 when over 2.1 million visitors explored the Kentucky Bourbon Trail alone. Seems like everybody wants to taste the good stuff these days. What do you think? Now, this bourbon boom is bringing some serious money into the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The economic impact is estimated to be in the range of $9 billion, with over 23,000 jobs that were created. And get this. Distilleries generated almost $360 million in state and local tax revenue last year. That's a lot of barrels. Of course, this does fly in the face of the latest conversation of the boom's going to bust. But let's leave that for a different day. Now, the Kentucky Trail, which started back in 1999 with just 7 distilleries, now boasts 46 stops. It's become a build-your-own-adventure experience with a new digital guide to help visitors plan their trips. So if you haven't been there yet, you got 46 stops to figure it all out. Now, with more distilleries popping up, investments topping $5 billion, and tourists flocking in from all over the world, Kentucky bourbon tourism is experiencing incredible growth, drawing comparisons to regions like Napa Valley. Those that are not familiar, that's those wine people. So it sounds like Kentucky's getting sophisticated. And why not? It's a good way to experience Kentucky's history and craftsmanship. And, of course, the best part is at the end of the tour, you get a nice little dram of that golden liquid. Cheers to that one, right? So if any of these stories have piqued your interest, be sure to check out our show notes for the links for the original articles. And don't forget to join the conversation on social media. We're on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Just search Chasing the Unicorn Podcast. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these stories and any other bourbon news you come across. So share it with us, and we will share it with everyone else. So with Thanksgiving around the corner, I'd like to move into Around the Barrel. Now, Around the Barrel is where we connect, share, and celebrate our love for this fine spirit. And with Thanksgiving just around that corner, I'd like to talk a little bit about turkey. Well, more about bourbon than turkey, of course. Now, here's a question I've been pondering. What are some good bourbon pairings for the turkey dinner? Turkey's a little bit tricky. Bourbon pairs, pretty versatile, I guess. And it comes in pretty handy, of course. All else fails, drink. But a high rye bourbon like Bullet can cut through some of the richness of the meal, while a wheated bourbon like maybe a Maker's Mark offers something softer and sweeter, which will complement some of those savory flavors. So for dessert, what do you guys think? I'm thinking, definitely a bourbon pecan pie has got to go for it. But if you're not into that, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. So what is your go-to for bourbon during the Thanksgiving time? And let me know on social media. Drop us a note. Let's talk about it. Now, I do have a community challenge for you this week. I challenge you to dream up your ideal Thanksgiving bourbon setups. What special bottle are you planning on opening for this occasion? And is there any kind of special cocktail bar, cocktails, etc., that you're going to plan on sharing with your guests? So share that ideal uh, drink with us on social media and use the hashtag Bourbon Thanksgiving. And let's get that conversation going. So, speaking of future episodes, we're aiming to launch our first official episode on January 1st, 2025, with new episodes dropping every week on Wednesday. But I would like to know, do you think Wednesday is a good day for you? Is that when you want to hear what's going on in the news and talk about bourbon and really think about it? So let me know on the social media and tell me when's the best time you want to get your bourbon fix. That's all I have for this week around the barrel. We're excited to be on this bourbon journey with you. We'll be back next week with more bourbon news, conversations, and community fun. Drunken Unicorn Uncorked. So I want to distill just a little bit of knowledge for you. This week, we're going to do a deep dive into the topic that's fundamental to understand bourbon. And what it is we're going to talk about mash bill. For you that are a little bit new to the bourbon world, you might be wondering what exactly is a mash bill. Simply put, it's a recipe for the bourbon. It outlines specific grains, used fermentation process, and by law, bourbon has to be made with a mash bill of at least 51% corn. Of course, the remaining percentages can be a variety of grains like rye or wheat or malted barley. But what does that really mean? Well, it plays a huge role in the shaping of the final flavor of your bourbon. So, for example, a high rye mash bill often leads to a spicier, bolder bourbon, while a wheated mash bill tends to produce a smoother, sweeter whiskey. Now, this is absolutely an oversimplification of everything, and we can absolutely dive deeper into that in future episodes, but just for the sake of today, we're going to talk about some basics. So let's break this down a little bit. Let's talk about traditional bourbon mash bill. This is your classic recipe, typically consisting of around 70% corn, 18% rye, and 12% barley. Think bourbons like Wild Turkey 101 or Evan Williams Bottle and Bond. Now you have your high rye mash bill. Those bourbons pack a punch with a little higher percentage of rye, often around 20% or more. These give them more of a spicier and drier finish. Some popular examples of this are Four Roses Single Barrel or a Bullet Rye. And then finally, let's talk about wheated bourbon. So the wheated bourbon mash bill, these are bourbons where they swap out the rye for wheat, resulting in a smoother, sweeter profile with notes of caramel and vanilla. Maker's Mark or Weller are prime examples of these bourbons. Now, a lot of people will find wheated bourbon is kind of their entry bourbon because it's a little more approachable. It doesn't have that big, bold spice. And then they move into something spicier later on. Now, here's where things get a little interesting. Some distilleries use multiple mash bills to create a variety of flavor profiles within their lineup. For example, Four Roses uses 2 different mash bills, 5 different yeast strains, results in 10 different recipes. This allows them to create a wide range of bourbons with unique characteristics. So understanding a mash bill can really unlock a deeper level of the appreciation of your bourbon, and it allows you to identify the flavors that you enjoy and explore new bourbons with confidence. So if you know what that flavor should be, and you see that on the mash bill, then you have a good idea that you might enjoy this or at least be willing to try it. So next time you pick up a bottle, I want you to take a look at the mash bill and see if you can predict what the flavor is going to be. Now, I do have one public service announcement. Not all distillers actually share their mash bill. So all I can say is good luck in your hunt. So that's all I have for this week's Drunken Unicorn Uncorked. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the world of bourbon. Till then, happy sipping. Would like to move into the perfect pour, where we explore the nuances of bourbon together. Today, I'm excited to share our experience with a truly special bourbon we discovered during a recent trip to Widow Jane Distillery out of New York. So, Widow Jane is a craft distillery located in the heart of Brooklyn, and they're known for their small batch bourbons that are meticulously crafted using limestone mineral water sourced from Rosendale Mines in upstate New York. This water is naturally filtered through limestone, gives it a unique mineral content that contributes to flavor of their whiskey. Pretty cool that they source their water from historic mines, which were once used actually as the cement for New York City's most iconic landmark. Speaking of history, the distillery itself is located in a beautiful building that was once a factory for making chocolate. Got an amazing rustic charm, exposed brick, wooden beams. Chocolate's gone. Charm's still there. We had a chance to tour the distillery and see their stills, learn all about their process from grain to glass. And of course, the highlight of the entire tour was the tasting. We tried Baby Jane, their bourbon, their 10-year bourbon, and an applewood rye. So I really enjoyed the Baby Jane. It had sweetness, notes of caramel, vanilla, it was smooth finish. For me, it was the 10-year. That was their standout. It was a rich and complex with layers of spice and oak. But the real treat was when I actually headed over to the bar next door, and they had their 10-year anniversary edition. Now, that one had a copper label. It was unique. The bourbon itself was great. On the nose, I got a beautiful blend of vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, a hint of cream. It was kind of like a warm hug on a cold day. Taking a sip, the first flavors just exploded on my palate, and I tasted orange peel, maple syrup, and a touch of cherry with just a subtle almond note. Pretty well balanced and complex. Now, the finish lingered with its warmth. It had a kind of a charred oak and touch of spice, and was just an all-around wonderful bourbon. I had to make a purchase of this one and bring that one home. Interesting enough, I did find another special release while I was there. We'll share that one another time, but that one looks really good. So if you're looking for a bourbon that has a unique story, great quality, I highly recommend checking out Widow Jane. They've got a great range of expressions to suit different palates. And if you're ever in Brooklyn, you should be sure to visit the distillery. The tour was fascinating. The staff was incredibly friendly and very passionate about it. So I'll be back next week with another perfect pour. Until then, savor the moment. All right, bourbon lovers, it's last call. Time for one last sip of knowledge before we wrap up this first prologue episode. This week, we journeyed from the bustling streets of Brooklyn, where Widow Jane's crafts were exceptional bourbon. We explored the impact of white oak shortages, the excitement of bourbon itself, and the intricacies of mash bill. But the key takeaway I want you to remember is this. Every sip of bourbon tells a story. Whether it's the history of the distillery, the unique water source, or carefully selected grains where there's always just a little bit more to discover beneath the surface. So next time you pour yourself a glass, take a moment to appreciate the journey it took to get there. Think about the people that crafted it and the land it comes from and the traditions this is embodies. It's those stories that truly elevate our bourbon experience. That's all for this week's prologue episode of Chasing the Unicorn. A huge thank you to everyone who tuned in. Remember to subscribe and share the podcast with your fellow bourbon enthusiasts. And be sure to connect with us on social media. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. Just search the Chasing the Unicorn podcast. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show, your favorite bourbons, and any questions you might have. You can find Chasing Unicorn on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. Subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. This is just the beginning of our journey together. So we'll be back next week with another prologue episode filled with bourbon knowledge, stories, tasting experiences. Until then, happy hunting for your perfect unicorn.